Welcome to the Hogmanay Alex Salmond Show, where we present the highlights of 2020. We hope you had a wonderful and common sense Christmas.
Hogmanay is the Scots word for New Year's Eve and is taken very seriously in Scotland. Normally tonight would see vast crowds and celebrations in the home of Hogmanay. But this is a very different year, and this Hogmanay will be responsible and socially distanced, just like this programme. And just as COVID dominated the year, it dominated our interviews. Right back at the start of the year, we conducted the first of many interviews with Cambridge virologist and naked scientist Dr. Chris Smith. He gave us the first indication of the dramatic shape of things to come.
What you've potentially got is something which, while it's less lethal than SARS, is much more infectious than SARS and about as lethal as the 1918 flu pandemic, and everyone's susceptible to this, like they were for the 1918 Spanish flu pandemic. So if this were allowed to escape and go to its logical conclusion, one possibility, one worst case scenario, is it could be as bad as 1918. And remember, this was at a time when President Trump was joking about the virus and Prime Minister Johnson was not even turning up at the COVID Cobra meetings. Here's a selection of what our experts had to say about the virus as the year progressed and about the public health challenges presented by COVID.
We need to make testing quite a routine thing, and it's far from being a routine. And we just don't seem to have a grip of what we need to do.
Why do you want to set up a private testing laboratory and a private contact tracing service which will never, ever work as efficiently as if you had invested in your local NHS services and systems in both the local authority, in the NHS, and in Public Health England? If we look at the staggering amount of money spent, £12 billion, that is the equivalent of the entire budget of all the GPs and public health combined.
The asymptomatic testing, I think, is essential. It's not that difficult. One of the things that we proposed very early on was testing wastewater from halls of residence, but that was too difficult.
My worry really is that there are still a lot of people who don't really believe in the coronavirus. They don't think COVID is real. They think it's a hoax. And my big worry is that, for those entrenched people who just don't believe anything they're being told by science, will they even take a vaccine if it's made available? If they don't, then they will present a risk to everybody else who does. Because as long as, we don't achieve this herd immunity, either naturally or through vaccination, then there's always a chance that the virus will come back.
If we chop down rainforests, decide that we're going to eat exotic meats and kettle together everything from snakes, bats and pangolins with chickens and dogs in market spaces, and then everyone thinks it's their right to fly around the world as often as they like wherever they go, then there is no hope for us, because this will continue. We have to start recognising that the planet is itself vulnerable, that we are biological organisms as part of an ecosystem on it. We need to reconsider completely the way in which agriculture operates, trade, the way in which we manage our natural resources, and the way in which we travel. Because these sorts of behaviours have brought us to this point, and they will continue to do so again. So the world needs to rethink how it behaves, and also to learn to behave a great deal more cooperatively, as we are learning to do now, unfortunately, in these sad times, a great deal more cooperation than there has been before. And we need to make friends, not enemies.
Of course, COVID threatened international economic collapse, which we discussed with Professor Danny Blanchflower and former UK Government Chief Economist Vicky Pryce. But could it be that the psychological impact on a population struggling with successive lockdowns may be the long-term time bomb of the pandemic? A subject we raised with Lisa Cameron, MP.
The psychological crises for people come in waves. It doesn't come all at the one point in time. So it's important that we have this long-term delivery plan, and that's what's needed in terms of supporting mental well-being for staff.
know that if you're feeling really stressed and anxious, that's completely normal. So you've had 6 months now of your prefrontal cortex, which is an area of the brain which is all about higher thinking, critical analysis, being able to solve problems. It's really been impacted on because you've had stress and anxiety, which is only meant to occur momentarily. And what happens is that area of the brain gets impacted on it, and your amygdala, your instinct area, kind of takes over. So know that if you've not been feeling great, if you've not been thinking clearly, as things hopefully get back to normal, you'll just automatically start to get a lift in that area, and that will translate to you feeling a little bit better. On top of that, look, if you've survived this long, and even though it's been challenging and you've still got great relationships with the people that you love, reframe it. You're blessed, because it's great to miss people. It's great to have those people that you know that you love in your life and that are there for you.
Of course, while many countries struggled with COVID, a few handled it well. South Korea, New Zealand, and the tiny Faroe Islands, which we described as the light in the north.
We have all chosen this early intervention, that we went very early in with lockdown. In the Faroe Islands, we only had 3 positive cases when we locked down. We have traced all the cases, found the people who have been in contact with people who have tested positive, and that we have put people into quarantine.
We're living in a world where there's a huge amount of, and in fact, growing transmission of this virus, and we cannot be at all complacent about it. And we need to really keep managing our borders and keep doing large amounts of testing in New Zealand, and make sure our tracing systems, contact tracing systems, are working well as a backstop measure.
And thankfully, at the end of the year, we've got Chris Smith back on again with Professor Luke O'Neill. They were able to proclaim a triumph of science to give us all hope for the future.
Here we are, less than a year after we first discovered this virus existed, and we've got the genetic code, we've understood its biology, and now scientists have invented not one but possibly 40 different vaccines. There are 3 which are nearing the finishing line in the UK. This is really exciting, and not just really exciting science but really exciting medicine. These things look to be very, very effective. Let's hope they're really, really effective in the really long term, but for now, if we can carry on this trajectory, then yes, I think this is, as Boris Johnson said, is the beginning of the end.
It is remarkable, Alex, as Chris said. I mean, to have all these vaccines now at hand is an incredible achievement for science and medicine, obviously. There's at least 8 predicted by, say, June of next year that EMA could well approve. Same order as the MHRA, of course. We'll see the Pfizer one. Moderna will be next. Then you've got Sanofi. They're coming up, Johnson & Johnson, Novavax. And then, as you mentioned, Alex, there's the Russian one, which seems to be highly efficacious, and the Chinese one. So one prediction is by the middle of next year, there may be as many as 8 vaccines available for use in the European Union.
Of course, the pandemic was not the only big story of 2020. There is the small matter of a presidential election, and we had a range of experts commenting on the ups and downs of the presidential campaign.
President Trump, it would be fair to say, is not my nip of whiskey. However, he has a doughty defender in Jenna Ellis, albeit anthropologist Wade Davis sees in the Trump presidency the end of the American era.
One of the biggest issues that the campaign is working on right now is election integrity. We filed lawsuits in a wide variety of states to make sure that the protections and the safeguards around the ballot box are secured for every voter. And so regardless of who any one person is supporting, it is a fundamental protected right and privilege in America to be able to cast a ballot for those who will represent us. And so these lawsuits are for the purpose to make sure that we preserve and protect the sanctity of the ballot and make sure that every eligible voter in the United States has access to the ballot, votes once, and that their vote is counted.
When I say that America is at the end of an American era, look, I mean, I don't wish that. We'll be nostalgic, as I say, for the American century and the best parts of it. But remember that all empires are born to die. As a journalist at the Irish Times said so poignantly, people have had many feelings about America over the years, but they've never, ever, ever felt pity for the United States. And as health workers desperately awaited relief flights of basic supplies from China, I argue that the hinge of history moved to the Asian century.
I think Democrats are worried about this peaceful transition of power. I think Republicans are worried about it too. I think only the folks who are the most diehard Trump supporters, who support Trump over the notion of our democracy, are fine with his comments about fighting this on multiple levels, even if it seems to be legitimate. I think everybody else is worried about the prospect of him staying when we all believe that someone else won the election.
Can you see Senator Biden as anything more than a transitional figure? He's not likely, as we'd say in Scotland, to set the heather on fire, is he?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I think that you're right that he is probably a transitional figure. And I think he knows that. I think the Democrats have made their peace with that. I think that a part of the reason that we had such an intense debate about the vice president and who would be vice president was because everybody understood that the person named vice president would have a setup to be the president in the next election.
One of the key issues to emerge this year, powered by the pandemic and the killing of George Floyd in Minneapolis, was a resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement. We spoke to some of the key players, including grieving mother Darlene Kane, activist Taylor Ulmer, and Professor Jeffrey Palmer.
And the word players should be taken literally, because one of the most articulate advocates was former England football internationalist John Barnes.
And of course, Black History Month is about empowering young black kids to understand that their history is varied, and you have excellent black people in the past from an intellectual point of view, scientific point of view, who have done great things. But this is what we've been doing for a long while. We've been trying to influence young black kids to see their heroes, not just as boxers or footballers, as seeing them as intellectuals, seeing them as a scientist. So that's what we do. More importantly, Black History Month shouldn't be for black people. It should be for white people, because white people have to understand the history of black excellence from an intellectual and moral point of view. We need white society to see us as equal, not for us to see ourselves as equal, because I know we're equal.
Don't underestimate the systemic nature of racism. And I just feel programs like this help, because the university, they haven't done their jobs. The schools have not done their jobs. And it's probably not the school's fault. I think we need government to say to schools, get this in your curriculum.
I think that it has been extremely inspiring to see the global outpouring, to having, friends send me from Liberia pictures of people protesting, from Brussels to Brazil it literally has become a global movement. And with that being said, I think that the movement has been coined Black Lives Matter, Black Futures Matter, Black Love Matters. But matter is just the minimum. Black lives are cherished, they're beloved, they're important, and they're essential to the world in much the same way as all other lives. But right now, we're focusing on Black lives because they have been disproportionately impacted.
Join us after the break to take a look at some of our other highlights from this momentous year. We'll see you then.
Welcome back to our highlight show of 2020. Now, Brexit, like the poor, is ever with us. The debate raged on throughout the year, but under the shadow of the pandemic. We discussed it with Britain's longest-serving Euro MP, Claude Moraes, and the independent-minded Scottish nationalist and Eurosceptic, Alex Neil MSP.
This is how the argument was deployed.
As you're aware, the Prime Minister is having some sort of light show in Downing Street tomorrow to mark Britain's departure. Is there any ceremony taking place in the European Parliament? Is there anything to mark Britain's leaving of the institution?
I think the way that European Parliament authorities have played this has been very mature and sensible. They're not celebrating because they don't believe there's anything great to celebrate. And I was quoted in The Observer on Sunday just explaining why that's a better way to do it than light shows and so on, when you've still got a divided country and people who feel very bruised by this decision.
I think the mood in Downing Street will be, come hell or high water, we're going to deliver Brexit by the end of the year, even if it means leaving on WTO terms. And unless the EU can come up with some kind of compromise in those circumstances, then I think that's what will happen. A fundamental deal will be signed, perhaps with an extension of the transition on the 2 or 3 areas that might be impossible to reach agreement on by the end of December.
At no stage, Alec, have the European Union sought to impose the sort of conditions on any other country, whether it's Canada or any other country, that they are seeking to impose on the United Kingdom. That is practically not feasible, and it will lead to a no deal, unfortunately, if the European Union don't change their stance. To betray what the British people voted for, to sell out at this stage, to allow the European Court of Justice to override the decisions of the British Supreme Court would not be delivering Brexit, and it would create a massive disconnect between ourselves as the governing party and millions of people across the country who voted for and believe in Brexit and continue to believe in it.
We're living through the biggest national crisis since the 1930s. Now, in those circumstances, to have a man of Johnson's style of politics, jokey, fun, celebrity politics, I wonder whether he is, as we move into a very dark period in not just British history, but global history, whether that is the style of leader which people again want. Now, the question is what may replace him. Maybe the change will come from within the Conservative Party, but if matters are as grave as I believe they are now, I don't rule out, I'm not saying I know how it will happen, but I do not rule out the possibility of a coalition government and Prime Minister Starmer before the next general election is due.
Ireland is one of our fascinations on this show. We presented the arguments from inside the Dáil and the Stormont Assembly.
People from Northern Ireland who wanted to remain part of the EU and feel European. They felt it had been denied them in the way the agreement said could never happen, and they felt diminished. So we're talking about people who, if you went to them and your first question was, would you like to see a united Ireland someday? They would say yes, but that's an aspiration. If your second question was, will you join us to be an activist? They would have said no. But after the 24th of June 2016, the answer to the second question is, where do I sign up?
My view is not that we should never do it. Of course, I'm a Republican. It is the aim of, number one aim of Fianna Fáil, the party I led and for years and was actively involved at every level, that unification of the country. But it has to be done properly, properly organised, properly negotiated, trying to convince people. Any other way will only lead to hardship and failure.
Amid all the chaos, the Labour Party and Liberal Democrats managed to conduct leadership races. We surveyed the field and our experts tipped the results. It should be said they were both odds-on favourites.
Remember the old rule, governments lose elections, oppositions don't win them. So if Johnson is a disaster, the question is Keir Starmer the man who could replace him? If Johnson is a success, it doesn't matter what Keir Starmer does because Johnson is going to be in power for 10 years. So the question is, can he actually nail Johnson down?
So like a year ago, virtually everybody was saying, we've already discussed, A, this Labour Party would only vote for a Corbyn-type figure, and B, next time it would have to be a woman. So whenever Keir Starmer's name came up, they said, not a chance, it would be a woman. He might as well not stand. Instead, he's running away with it. They see in him a weighty, credible, authoritative figure who might be the leaderly figure to lead them towards some kind of recovery. And that's why he's doing much better, I suspect, than any political commentator would have predicted a year ago.
Maybe there are 30 plus seats which we could win in a way that we're complementary to the Labour Party rather than competitive with it. And if that happens, you've got serious numbers for an alternative government. I was there in 1997. I mean, that's how many of us got into Parliament in the first place with the Blair Revolution. It was a complementarity with the Labour Party rather than competition.
Scotland was never far from our thoughts on the show. This is how Alex summed up the 700th year anniversary of the Declaration of Arbroath. And he spoke to legendary Scots star Sheena Wellington.
Scottish Parliament was a dream that we all had, I think. And I never thought I would actually end up singing there. But it was a great boost to the self-confidence of, I think, the cultural scene in Scotland. And it was a tremendous honour for me.
The Declaration of Arbroath is 700 years old. It is a medieval document. It was sealed, not signed. It wasn't emailed to Avignon. It went by ship and by horse and took weeks to get there. But for all it's an ancient document, it's very modern in its concept. Firstly, it's sophisticated. All the stuff about the history of the Scots, that's there for a purpose. That's to establish the credentials of Scotland. Got here before the English, according to the Declaration. The language is learned. It tilts a cap at the Roman historian Sallust. It quotes from St. John the Divine that all people are created equal. It reminds the Pope that that should be the case. These are interesting concepts. But even more interesting is two things about the document. Firstly, it seems to go beyond the usual feudal medieval caste list of the barons, the nobles, good King Robert, the clergy who wrote the document. It talks about something called the community of the realm. And if the community of the realm can't be the feudal caste list, so it has to be something else. It's a sort of embracing that there's something beyond that. There's something which we currently term the people. And then, most revolutionary of all, it suggests what the people, the community of the realm, might do if good Lord Robert doesn't come up to snuff and doesn't fulfil what he's meant to do, doesn't protect Scotland against the English, then they'll get rid of him and get someone else in. Now that seems to be some sort of look at a contractual relationship between the government and the governed, or what we might term in modern days popular sovereignty. Now that is a concept which in the modern world has decided the fate of nations. It's a concept which might still decide the fate of Scotland.
But what of Scotland's future? We had a range of guests articulating the route forward for this restless nation, including Professor Tom Devine, Ken McCaskill MP, Billy Kay and economist Robin McAlpine. This is how veteran commentator Ruth Wishart saw things at the start of the year.
Well, I mean, I think the general consensus with which I agree, Alex, is that there will be no referendum in 2020. Apart from anything else, we learned this week from the Institute for Government that for one to happen, just in terms of the logistics, there would have to be an agreement on a Section 30 order by April, and that ain't going to happen. So there's not going to be one this year. The 2021 Scottish general election is effectively the referendum, the next referendum on independence. But the problem with that is that even if they win and win big, the Scottish Government, you still have the not inconsiderable problem of Boris saying no.
But if politics is an art, not a science, then what about the art of politics? Two of our most popular shows feature the work of artist Gerard Burns and through the lens of legendary photographer Harry Benson, the man who's photographed every American president since Dwight D. Eisenhower.
When asked, why the saltire, when I made that painting, I would probably have described myself as being apolitical. It wasn't intended to be a political statement. Basically, I love the saltire because I'm Scottish. And as an artist, you're looking all the time for things that pop out at you. You're looking for that thing that catches your eye again and again. And everywhere I went in the world, whenever I saw photographs, the saltire just jumped out at me. So for me, it was almost a case of, I can't believe anybody, people aren't doing something with this.
Photographed him maybe 40 years. I said to him, Donald, I'd like to come over and photograph you in the White House. And he said, no. I said, well, Donald, I've known you for over 40 years. And you're saying no?
Because he didn't like the picture you took with him with all the money, I understand. He wasn't too happy with that picture.
Well, it did show greed, and he offered it. I said, because he had taken over a casino. I said, this is wonderful, Donald, all that money. He said, I can go in there and I can get $1 million right now, and it's mine. And I told him, I said, I've never photographed $1 million. I don't think I've ever seen it. And he said, you've got it. And he wanted it to be actually $1 million, and it was. I didn't want any fake picture.
Finally, at the year end, we paid tribute to those we have lost. We featured the life and contribution of non-Irish peacemaker John Hume and the world's most famous Scot, Sir Sean Connery. Screen legend, the world's most famous Scot, the definitive Bond, demon golfer, Sean Connery was all of these things and much, much more. To me, he was a loyal, steadfast friend over more than 30 years. When I took this show on some 2-3 years ago, the one person I really wanted to interview was Sean Connery, and he readily agreed, but circumstances in health have prevented that happening. And the reason was that of all the interviews that Sean did over the years, all the things that were written about him, I only read one from the Scottish author Willie McIlvanney, which got close to capturing the essence of Sean Connery. Because this was not just a great personality, a great movie star. This was a great human being, a deeply, deeply humanist, funny, ironic human being, with great views on life and everything else, and never frightened to express them. In my life, I've been privileged to meet a few great people, but only a few. And one of these was Sean Connery. Now, in times to come, we'll get the opportunity to do a proper tribute to Sean. But in the meantime, for Lady Michelin and the family, our condolences. For the rest of us round the world, a light has dimmed in our universe, but it will shine on in our memories and hopes for the future. Goodbye, Sean.
In many respects, Hume was a moral exemplar as much as a political exemplar. I mean, he was absolutely steadfast and unshakable in his opposition to political violence during some extremely difficult times. And, that part of his legacy, I think, is really precious and should be revered, because he came through a lot of very, very hard times. I think his legacy will be seen in moral terms exemplary.
And so, until we see you next year, have a socially distant celebration. Stay safe as you ring in the new year. And of course, to Alex, happy birthday.
Thank you, Tasmina. I share it with Sir Alex Ferguson and Bonnie Prince Charlie. And as we say in Scotland, all the best for 2021.